Rand, Marine Habitat Protection Senior Director at the Pew Charitable Trusts.
Hello and welcome. Thank you all for joining us today for this live podcast taping of The Catch. I'd like to thank Foreign Policy Magazine and the Walton Family Foundation for hosting this event. Again, I'm Matt Rand. I'm the Senior Director of Ocean Habitat at the Pew Charitable Trust. Again, we're going to tape a live taping of the Catch podcast, the foreign policy podcast on seafood and the impact it's having on the world. If you're not already subscribed to the podcast, please take out your phone now, pull out the Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and type in The Catch, and you'll see the podcast. It's got tremendous content on there. They're going to continue to have another season, so I encourage you all to subscribe to the podcast. There's some great content on there. Is it still? All right. So before I get into introducing this esteemed panel, actually, I think the voice of God's going to introduce the esteemed panel. I wanted to give a little bit of background on marine protected areas. Not everyone knows exactly what a marine protected area is, so I'll try to simplify this as much as I can. A marine protected area is like a national park in the world's oceans. Some of those national parks allow for extraction of small-scale fisheries. Some of those parks are completely protected, a place like Yellowstone in the world's oceans. So there's a little bit of a difference in some of these protected areas around the world. Some of them are benefiting local communities. Some of them are totally focused on biodiversity. We know that marine protected areas are one of the best ways to conserve the ocean and the biodiversity within it. It is really exciting to be here in New York City, right down the street from the United Nations during Climate Week. And it's very fitting that we're having this conversation right now about marine protected areas. In 2023, the UN developed a brand new treaty to protect half of the world. Its conservation of half of the world is the high seas. It's called the BBNJ Treaty. Beyond national jurisdiction. That was just a year ago. In the same year, in Montreal, Canada, the world came together and had another treaty that it just approved to protect 30% of the planet by 2030, 30% of the oceans and 30% of the land. And the reason for these treaties is to keep the world's ecosystem, and in the case of marine protected areas, the ocean ecosystem intact and functioning and providing biodiversity and fisheries to benefit humans. So we are at a key point in time to actually try to protect 30% of the world. We have the treaties in place. We have the countries that have agreed to it. It's now a matter of whether or not we're actually able to accomplish these goals. So today we're going to get into a little bit of the dynamics around actually establishing these marine protected areas. I always say conservation takes courage because it's not easy to protect a place. Believe it or not, it seems like it should be pretty simple, but it's not. It takes courage. And very often it's controversial. If you are working on a marine protected area that is directly adjacent to a local community that is relying on it for its livelihood, they very well may object. At the same time, if you're working on a very large area way off in the remote Pacific Islands, you may have objection from the industrial fishery sector. So today we're going to get into that a little bit more. We're going to talk about and understand the dynamics of what are the challenges that local efforts are facing to protect the world's oceans through marine protected areas. And so with that, I want to get right into it. We've got a great group of people to talk today with a lot of different perspective, and I'll let the voice of God tell us about the panelists and invite them onto the stage.
Please welcome to the stage Joel Johnson, the President and CEO of the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation. Edit Rudy Lukanga, Executive Director of the Environment Management and Economic Development Organization. Jim Leith, Co-Director of the Center for Ocean Solutions and the William and Eva Price Senior Fellow in the Stanford Woods Institute for the Environment, and Monica Medina, President and CEO of the Wildlife Conservation Society.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. I'm very excited to have such an esteemed panel here with us today. I'm going to start right away with Monica to frame the big dynamics for us. What's going on in the world's oceans? Why are we here at the UN talking about protecting the world's oceans? And why should we care about the health of the world's oceans? So, Monica.
Thank you. Thanks to Foreign Policy. Thanks for being here, everyone listening. It's great to know that people are interested in this because it is half the planet, and that's why it matters, and that's why we're here. Until recently, half the planet was essentially ungoverned. There were sector-by-sector management bodies for maritime shipping and for some fishing in the ocean. But generally, if an activity took place beyond 200 miles from a coastline, there was no real regulatory or policy way to preserve biodiversity or to make marine protected areas. But all that changed about a year ago when the entire planet came together, and finally, after 15 years of negotiation, by the way, so it wasn't just, a snap of the fingers, but finally, the world agreed to create a treaty under which we could actually preserve in protected areas major parts of the high seas, those areas beyond 200 miles. And so it is a really incredible day, a new day, where we finally have this important tool in conservation available to us as a global community to create protected areas in the areas that don't belong to any country.
Thanks, Monica. Edie Truth, I'm going to turn to you. We were having a great conversation in the green room and talking about some of the amazing work that you've been doing in Tanzania and some of the real significant challenges that local small-scale artisanal fishermen are facing and the dynamics around protected areas. So I would love it if you would talk a little bit about the findings that you've had in your research, but also your direct experience of working with those women and those communities in Tanzania, and a little bit about what might be some of the solutions here to ensure healthy ecosystems and healthy, resilient communities.
Thank you so much for this very important question, and thank you for having me here. It's an honor for me to take part in this dialogue where we are discussing about solution-oriented practices, but also the urgency of taking action towards the impact of climate change and marine protected areas regulations, especially to the local communities that I work with, and especially for the women. So the main thing here is that there have been significant changes that have been happening in the ocean, several challenges that have pushed the decision makers to adopt mechanisms such as the marine protected areas. And when you look at the objectives of why marine protected areas have been established, among them, they look at protecting the ecosystem, looking at protection of the biodiversity, looking at sustainability of the fisheries, but where is the human in those objectives? So this is where I'm coming from. And also looking at the small-scale fishers and fish workers who are entirely dependent on the marine ecosystems for their lives and well-being. Having the decisions to have the marine protected areas as a measure of conserving the marine or the ocean health, as a measure of conserving the marine resources, is good. However, to what extent are they involved in the decision-making processes? And the marine protected areas, they come in with regulations. For example, They are no tech zone completely, somehow. But then they are for example, the women that I work with, they rely on the near shore for their lives and livelihoods. But these regulations that come with, for example, the marine protected areas, that this is a protected zone, you don't have to take anything. This has disrupted the lives and livelihoods, the tradition, the culture of the small-scale fishers, and particularly women. And it has also placed them in a situation where now, in searching for alternative livelihoods, some have thought of going into the deeper waters. But how do they reach there? Looking at the small-scale fisheries itself, the definition is very dependent on the context. So from where I come from, some use very tiny canoes to fish. So how do they reach to the deeper waters where they could get fish because they don't have alternatives? So it is placing them at a great danger, for example, in terms of safety. We have several cases of drowning in Tanzania, just Tanzania alone. Just consider now other countries, and particularly women, you see. Some have ventured into seaweed farming. And the research that we are doing in looking at, how seaweed is contributing to the lives and livelihoods of these women, it's a huge challenge. Most of the women don't know how to swim. So there are some men who have looked at that as an opportunity. They are now bringing in boats to ferry them from their location, go fish, for example, the octopus, and then bringing them back. But again, they don't have any safety gears to protect them. So this is where there has been a challenge. But then in areas where the regulations allow the women to fish, especially during the low tide, there's been a competition between men and women. So there is insufficient implementation of the regulation that has been put there, because men would come in and fish during the low tide zone. And when the spring tide comes, it's when women should also be fishing, for example, collection of the octopus. But because already there are some of the fishers who have been taking it illegally, then there's a lot of competition that puts them into the risk of, conflict between the men and women. So this has impacted the food security in the households of these women. And I tell you, most of these women who are involved in small-scale fisheries, they are the head of their families. They are the heads of their households. So if they are denied this access, how would they survive? And it's not just them, their children, their families, their communities. And I work with women who have less than $20 as their capital. So they depend on the daily, profit that they make. So that little thing that they make is what, keeps their families. Tomorrow they go back. But again, the day-to-day business that they do, they supply the fish to the neighborhood, to the communities, which is contributing again to food security, nutrition of their communities. So this has been really something that is important. And for me, having this platform, I have to speak about the women, because also yesterday when I was looking at my LinkedIn page, I saw the post from the General, the Honorable Guterres, who expressed his disappointment at this big meeting at the UNGA, where less than 10% of the speakers in that meeting were women. Mm-hmm. So what is this telling us? Mm-hmm. You see, what is this telling us? If this huge meeting, this huge platform, this huge policy, policy-making body is also kind of, I wouldn't want to say complaining, but, but what is this telling us? So we really need to take action And I really want to acknowledge everybody here, because you are coming in here. We are all supposed to engage in a meaningful way. We need this collective action. We need to take deliberate efforts and commitment towards changing things, towards transforming the lives and livelihoods of the communities around where we are living. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to come back to you with a follow-up question, but before I do that, I'm going to turn to Joel. I'm going to ask Joel to talk a little bit about maybe a different community, different way of which the community is engaged in trying to advance a marine protected area, a marine sanctuary. Sure. At a very far distance, a very large protected area. Currently, there are actually 2 major marine protected area proposals through the National Marine Sanctuary's effort. Papahānaumokuākea, one of the world's largest protected areas in the world, and the Pacific Remote Islands, being led by indigenous leaders from Hawaii and throughout the Pacific. Yeah. So it's very different dynamics. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that dynamic and the importance of the storytelling around that effort to hopefully have very meaningful outcomes.
Absolutely. Thank you, Matt, and also thank you to the panelists, Monica, Jim, Edith, and for your powerful words there about our representation in our work here. So I have the privilege of stewarding over 640,000 square miles of United States federal national marine sanctuaries as the head of a foundation whose job is to convene and bring people together to tackle some of these very difficult and challenging issues that face us today in how we are going to conserve our oceans and all of our waterways. And the National Marine Sanctuary System is 50 years old and comprises some 16 sanctuaries, but it's on a roll. It's growing as part of this incredible global 30 by 30 effort and how that has been translated in President Biden's America the Beautiful initiative. We have a national goal to achieve 30% of land and waters in terms of protections. And sanctuaries, marine protected areas, they have a role in doing this task. I think of sanctuaries as sources of solutions. So these are solutions that for many of us in this room and working in this space are relatively new. But when we look at the indigenous communities that have stewarded this planet for thousands of years, it's not new. It's not new. It is a traditional way of life. It is a culture passed down generation by generation, orally, and also through numerous cultural practices that transmit knowledge over the generations. And that's something that you can see firsthand when you visit American Samoa National Marine Sanctuary or Papahānaumokuākea National Marine Monument. I'm pretty sure I butchered that, but that's fine. As well as some of the proposed National Marine Sanctuaries that are coming up kind of in the hopper for creation. And I think of these, as I said, solutions, because the federal National Marine Sanctuary System, look, it's not perfect. It's not perfect. But within 50 years of work, there have been a lot of lessons learned. And one of the greatest lessons learned is that sanctuaries and marine protected areas work best when they're people-powered, when they come from the community. And there are numerous ways in the federal system to make a sanctuary, and I'm not supposed to have favorites, but I do have those favorites, and those are the ones that are community-driven. And so when we think about the work right now of the Pacific Remote Islands to create what ostensibly could become one of the largest national marine sanctuaries in the world, we have to look first at what are those peoples, those diverse peoples and communities in the Pacific Islands with different ethnicities, different tribal affiliations, different regional groups. What are their needs, and how do we work together on our global policies to preserve biodiversity? How do we find the methodologies, the languages, and the financing to support engagement that will lead to the meaningful change that we need? So I am a bit of a storyteller. My conservation is a second life for me, so I'll tell a quick story and then pass the mic. I was in American Samoa in January of this year and getting a tour of the National Marine Sanctuary, Talofa Lava, to my American Samoan friends there. I was walking along the island on the shore of Anu'u, a small island that's part of the sanctuary. And as we were walking to a ceremonial lunch, we looked over at the beach, and there was a woman in the water, and she had a basket and a plastic bag, and she was by herself, and she's wading through the waves. And we all, of course, we all just stopped, right? The delegation, we wanted to see what this was. And of course, Chief Atuatasi, who is the superintendent of American National Marine Sanctuary, he knew what it was and asked the woman to come over. So we stepped onto the beach, and she brought what she was pulling from the water, and it was limu fuafua, sea grapes. Sea grapes that if you go into a market in Tokyo, I don't know how expensive they are, or if you try to get them on special order on, I don't know, Gold Belly, you know, you're going to be spending quite a bit of money. But this was a traditional food, a source of food security, subsistence, but also cultural meaning to the American Samoans. And it was just one of many wonderful examples and experiences I had when I was there on the ground. And I could only imagine if I were to travel around the Pacific Remote Islands and engage the Chamorros, the Micronesians, and other types of groups that are really make up the diversity of this community. We would learn a great deal from them about how to engage and develop a mutual, strong, indigenous knowledge-based National Marine Sanctuary there. And I think as we look at BB&J and the opportunity in front of us, look, I mean, I encourage you to think about the 50 years of work of the National Marine Sanctuary Act in achieving national marine sanctuaries in the U.S. as a laboratory, a test tube, a place where ideas have been created. Some have stunk and failed and not achieved their goals, and others have. Others have really done incredible work. There are scientists, activists, artists, researchers, volunteers, all working in those sanctuaries every day, coming up with different solutions. Think of it as a community of practice that the world can tap into as they look ahead to creating new marine protected areas now that BB&J is here. It's a really exciting opportunity.
And just for the audience, BB&J is that treaty that for half of the planet is area beyond national jurisdiction, that we now have the opportunity to create protected areas beyond national borders. All right, you brought in food into this really well. We heard a little bit about security and jobs and livelihoods. Jim, I'm going to ask you to really bring it back to food substance. How are we ensuring that we've actually got sustainable protein coming out of the ocean, ideally in perpetuity? And I'm going to throw out a little tidbit here is that some scientists have already indicated that we've hit peak fishing. The amount of fish that the ocean can be removed from has already climaxed to the point and now is starting to drop. We also know the science is clear. Marine protected areas can have tremendous positive impact on fishing populations, fishery populations. But there is a major challenge here when it comes to food security and conservation. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your view on how we can do both, because I think the planet needs both, a healthy ocean ecosystem that is providing jobs and food security. So, Jim.
Okay, so there was a lot in that question. Let me start here. We all have a general understanding that seafood comes from the sea, right? So far, so good. But what we really haven't recognized is just how important food from the sea is for our food systems. If you look at all the food produced in the water, so the ocean and freshwater, about 3 billion people around the world depend on those what we call blue foods, as a major source of nutrition. Those fisheries and fish farms provide about 600 or 700 million jobs, right? So these are an important part of economies all over the world, but they're a fundamentally important part of food systems. And there is a second part to this, which is if you pay very much attention to how food is produced now, you know we can't continue the way we are. We can't continue to clear forest to grow more cows, right? So we are going to be even more dependent on food produced in the water to build the food system we need to feed a world of 10 billion people, right, in a way that the planet can sustain. And that takes us to some of the problems that Matt's just highlighted. Let me start first with why blue foods are special and why they represent an opportunity as well as the challenges he outlined. The first is diversity. So we've led a team of 100 researchers from around the world who have looked at these questions, right? What roles can blue foods play in food systems? And the first thing they highlight is, while there is only one species of chicken eaten around the world, there are 2,500 species of blue foods, right? And that diversity gives us lots of opportunity, right? Because there are blue foods with different nutrient profiles, blue foods with different footprints, with different opportunities for incomes and livelihoods. So diversity is the starting point, a huge array of possibilities. The second is that we tend to talk about fish in particular as protein. It is a really good source of protein, but it is in fact even more important as a source of micronutrients that are essential to healthy development. Most blue foods are richer in a whole suite of development important micronutrients than any terrestrial animal source food. So that's vitamin A and B12, it's calcium, iron, zinc, and of course omega-3s. And these are foods essential to a healthy diet. And so that's the second thing, right? There is huge nutritional opportunity here, and we can't just think of it as fish or even just as protein. The third is that many of these blue foods have a lighter footprint. They can be produced with less impact on the climate and also on the earth than many terrestrial animal source foods. So there is an opportunity to also improve the sustainability of the system. So that's why this is important, and it's why taking care of the oceans in the way we're describing here becomes even more important, because we need these oceans to sustain us and our food system going forward. As Matt alluded, there are today many fisheries that are overfished. We've not done a great job of managing fisheries in many parts of the world, and that's partly because we simply haven't recognized how important they are to our livelihoods and future. So part of the challenge going forward is how do we better manage those fisheries? How do we make sure that we actually get them to the point that they are on a sustained basis providing the food they can provide for us? And that's true at a local level in nearshore waters, and it's true in the wide open ocean for pelagic fisheries. MPAs, and more broadly, conservation measures are a super important part of getting to that balance, getting to sustaining the systems that will allow those systems to sustain us. And let me just say one quick additional thing about that. What that looks like will depend on what we're talking about. If you're talking about the open ocean, you're talking about commercial, typically industrial fisheries. There is the opportunity, whether it's on the high seas or in national waters, to create large-scale marine protected areas that will help conserve biodiversity and improve the resilience of these resources as the climate changes, right? As warming waters drive fisheries to new places. So that's going to be crucial, challenging, lots of constituencies involved there, but crucial. You have a different kind of challenge when you get to the nearshore waters that Edith Truth has been talking about, where you talk about fishers who are directly dependent for their food, for their livelihoods on the waters that are right there. And there you need to be working with them on conservation strategies that help them sustain that resource while also sustaining their livelihoods and their well-being. And that's one of the challenges that lies ahead as we talk about acting on these priorities.
Thanks, Jim. That was great. Okay, I'm going to go back to Monica, back to a big kind of global perspective here as well. So I point out that the science actually indicated we need to protect 37% of the ocean. That was the science. And the science said that in order to keep the ocean healthy, functioning, and fisheries. That's one of the strategies to actually help ensure that there's enough buffer in the ocean so that commercial fisheries don't overexploit. So that was the science framing. Ultimately, the treaty said, politicians got involved and said 30 by 30. Right? It was much easier to pass 30 by 30 than 37 by 30. So that's the overlay and how we got to a new treaty for 30 by 30. We also know, through lots of science, that the ones that benefit the ocean, these protected areas that benefit the oceans the most, and giving opportunity for fisheries, in some cases 400 times more productive fisheries, are the ones that are fully protected. They're not being exploited. Makes perfect sense. If you leave nature alone, it does fine. You start to impact nature, it starts to degrade. So globally, we are tracking it through the UN. 8% of the world's oceans are protected in some form, but not the form that we know does the best for the ocean, and not what the science said we needed, 37% of fully protected areas. We're at 3% of the world's oceans in fully protected areas. So Monica, we've got a long way to go in a short time to save the world's oceans, to ensure that we've got sustainable livelihoods, biodiversity, and a functioning ocean. What do we need to do as a global society? And then I'm going to ask you, since you've just left the Biden administration not that long ago, what does the Biden administration need to do to help show the world a path forward for ocean conservation?
Well, I did just leave about a year ago, and I'm now at Conservation International as a distinguished fellow, which is a really wonderful place to be able to speak about these issues, kind of not sitting in the government, because I can speak more freely about them. And that is one of the nice things about my current role. And the things that we can do are really obvious. We can help lead the world in creating these new protected areas. There are already proposals out there. There's another treaty. I know we were talking about BBNJ, but there's another treaty that covers the Antarctic. And for many years, several countries that live along those Arctic waters would like to have proposed and would like to see giant protected areas in the Antarctic, which is a global commons. It's another one of these areas that isn't owned by any country. It's not a country. It is internationally managed. It's managed for science, for peace, what a thought, and conservation. And now we want to actually limit fishing. There is fishing that takes place down there. Proposals have been made to limit fishing in some giant areas that would give us a huge leap towards that 30%. And we're working very hard to try and make that happen. There are a couple of countries that are blocking that now, but we hope that over time we can persuade them. And that's where diplomacy matters, where leadership matters. And lots of countries are working on this, but the U.S. being actively and engaged in this process really is important, because I think countries do look up to us for our stewardship and for our willingness to actually help fund conservation. We're the largest funder of biodiversity conservation around the world, the largest contributor to the Global Environment Facility, which does a lot of that global conservation work. So there's a lot that we have already done in helping to get this BBNJ treaty negotiated. I really hope that the Senate will see it as something that should be ratified. We don't ratify treaties very often in this country, and it's a shame. We aren't a member of the Law of the Sea Convention, which is the umbrella treaty under which this one agreement falls. It's the umbrella for the fishing treaties that are out there. So it would be great if we could persuade our Senate to actually ratify the BBNJ. That would be a huge step forward. It would be great if we created new protected areas in our own waters and led by example, which we are this close to getting to 30% in our own waters. And if by chance the president would use some additional authority to expand and create a sanctuary fully out in the Pacific remote islands, fully out to the 200-mile EEZ limit within our waters, that would be great, because it's almost like a high seas MPA, because it's out in the middle of the Pacific. And I think we are a Pacific nation, so I'll end with our own Papahanaumokuakea sanctuary is a wonderful one, and it shows the other countries in the Pacific that we care about the big ocean. They're small countries, and their country is actually their ocean. And when we protect big expanses of our ocean, we show them that we also care about protecting the ocean. And their territories, and we intend to steward it well in cooperation with them as a Pacific partner.
Thanks, Monica. All right, we've gone global. I want to bring it back to Edie Truth and talk about Tanzania and food security, livelihoods. You did a great job of presenting how challenging the dynamics are, some of the dynamics around making sure that it's inclusive. We had a conversation in the green room a little bit about some of the competing dynamics of industrial sector, artisanal fishing, and conservation. So I'd like for you to talk a little bit about what you would like to see as solutions for Tanzania, for those artisanal fishermen, for the women in Tanzania. What vision would you have for trying to fix that dynamic and make a healthy ocean with sustainable livelihoods?
Yeah, thank you, Matt. That's really interesting and it's a very important question. And again, I'd like to say that I'm grateful to sit on a panel that is seeking solutions and championing equity and justice. This is very important. So when it comes to action, what is the vision? For me, with my experience of working with the small-scale fisheries, fishers, fish workers, men and women, I would like, when I close my eyes and I wake up one of these days, I see fishing communities with prosperous food. They are able to take their children to school, living in a healthy environment, and they don't have to worry about my tomorrow. How will I wake up? This is what I want to see. But the question is, how do we reach there? How do we see that? And normally, I ask this question looking into the role and place of women in the small-scale fisheries. Where I live near one of the fishing landing sites. And very early in the morning, at around 5, 6, women passing with their baskets, bucket, going to the beach to buy fish, to process, sell around, to get some money, income, to manage their lives. I'm asking, imagine of a day when you go to the beach and you don't see any woman there. What would happen? That's the question for us, right? So what I would need to see, I mean, my vision is to have respect of these women. Respect in what sense? We have, yes, right now, there are a lot of policies, gender-inclusive policies, programs for women empowerment, but the implementation is where the challenge comes in. And these challenges in implementation come along with other challenges in terms of access to financial resources, access to technical skills. So this is important that in order to reach there, we need to avail resources to the local institutions. We have governments, yes, but local institutions, like the institutions that I work with, because I work in Tanzania, but also I belong to a continental network of women in fisheries in Africa. And right now we have membership in more than 40 countries. And one of the solutions is collective action. So why, just to give an example of the dream, that the vision that I would want to see is women are taking part in the decision making. They are part and parcel of the sitters around the table, but also they are able to contribute in the menu, right? So the women who have come together at the Africa level, why did they come together? Because of bringing their voice across. Because they want to advocate for change. Alone cannot do anything, cannot do much. And this is the same even for, like, as we are seated here, as this week, you know, our leaders are sitting at the UNGA making some decisions here. Everybody coming together. One country alone cannot do anything. Monica said here about the MPAs. Why are we doing that? If one country is conserving, the other country will not do anything, is not doing anything, we end up also with nothing. So what I would wish to see in Tanzania, for example, I'm using Tanzania as a case, in the fisheries sector, we have a national network of women in fisheries. Again, we formed that with the same vision of wanting to support women so that they are able to be confident in themselves first, be able to identify the key role that they play, because sometimes because of the systemic nature, the systemic nature, meaning like leaving the women behind since history. Yeah. So they also don't believe in themselves. So through coming together, they are able to learn together. They are able to share their experiences. They are able to knock on the government's offices like, why is the situation as it is? We are seeing these policies here, but what is the action? So another thing is trainings. Support the women, support the small-scale fishers. Through their institutions, they are able to access the trainings that would inform what they need. So it's just not like training from anywhere, but the trainings that inform their need. So the needs assessment should be done first, and then they be supported in that way. So I think that is the dream, and also implementation of these important instruments, like the international guidelines for securing sustainable small-scale fisheries in the context of food security and poverty alleviation. This is a key international document, and is the first that is addressing that. It was passed by FAO in 2014. So this year we are celebrating the anniversary of the small-scale fisheries guidelines. But we cannot just celebrate this instrument. We need to take action, implementing. But the implementation has to happen on the ground, because that's where we want to see the transformation. That's where these are the ones that they are impacted the most by the policies that are passed at this stage here at the global level, by the policies that are passed at the regional level, and even at the national level. Yeah, they should be supported, and with that, I think we can see the result that we wish to see, and we can have everybody happy because they've had their share on the plate. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Matt, can I jump in just for 1 second
Please,
and say
Mike.
two things? I'll be very quick. First, I have to give a shout out to a wonderful diplomat from Singapore named Rina Lee, who was really the force behind the BBNJ agreement. She was the secretariat, she led the negotiation, and she did not give up. We had to spend 2 nights. We negotiated at the end for almost 2 days straight without a break. And Rina never gave up. And for that, she became one of Time 100, the 100 leaders for the year this year. And she well-deserved. So let's go women. And just one quick thing to say, there is no better investment than a woman fisher. Just no better investment in the fisheries sector.
Thank you for that.
All right, thank you. All right, well, I'm going to shift it a little bit. Both Joel's father and my father were fishermen, and both Joel and I are passionate about fishing. We're trading stories in the back there. Obviously, Joel, key to this dynamic is the intersection of conservation and fishermen. Now, Joel and I are sport fishermen, but the passion for fishing is there. And so, Joel, the sanctuaries in the United States have an array of different levels of protection. Right. Some have fishing in them. Some areas are off limits to fishing. Right. Can you talk a little bit about how are we able to communicate and bring fishermen inside the tent and the vision for the protection of the ocean? What do we need to do there?
Okay, so I'll make this quick because I'm sure that I want to make sure everyone else gets an opportunity to talk. But let me start by also taking a moment to thank the Catch and the Walton Family Foundation for this opportunity, and to acknowledge that I also work very closely with NOAA and they are the managers of our 16 and growing national marine sanctuaries and national marine monuments. And NOAA is a complex organization with many different divisions. Fisheries is a considerable force within NOAA, as well as our great partners, the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries. The story begins with the collaboration between the policies and the regulations that we have, the intent, the efforts that are happening on the ground to bring to life a marine protected area. And I'll just use a good example here of the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary, the proposed sanctuary, which is close to becoming reality. A very powerful and strong and dedicated, fierce woman advocate, Violet Sage Walker, and the Northern Chumash Tribal Council came together to make a nomination, the first tribally led indigenous nomination for a sanctuary. And at the heart of that was culture and tradition, but a fishing. So the white abalone, for example, is a endangered species of abalone, one I believe of 7 in the region, that is sacred to the Chumash people. And it's a key source of food and culture and meaning. One of the powers that is so interesting about national marine sanctuaries in the U.S. is when these sanctuaries are created, they bring together an advisory council. And the advisory council includes some of these culture makers, as well as these federal officials and state officials. And then also there are spots for recreational fishermen and, in some cases, in most cases, commercial fishermen. Why? Because these sites, they have a history. They have use. They have jurisdiction issues. It's complicated, and the best way to move forward on these things is to bring people together, to bring it out into the light, to be transparent about that process, and engage these different voices. And so we all know in our work, when we engage the grassroots and grass tops, when we go to the people, we find their passions, we find what they care about, we advocate for that and bring that forward. What's really cool about the Sanctuary Advisory Council is it codifies that. Again, that's one of those powerful elements that speaks to the living laboratory power of national marine sanctuaries. And just a shout out to the hundreds, if thousands of federal officials at NOAA who are working behind the scenes at a breakneck pace right now to create these new national marine sanctuaries and get them off the ground. They have been putting in the work, and we're very proud of them. The last thing I'll say, and then won't say anything else for the rest of our time, is the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation plays a unique role as a funder. And we haven't gotten into a lot of the power funding. Thank you for mentioning the Global Environmental Facility. But we really do need to also make sure that we are engaging our funders at every level of the conversation when we start these efforts. They go hand in hand in driving this work forward. And so thank you to those funders who have been our partners both nationally and globally in this work. We just launched a new community sanctuary fund. I think this community sanctuary fund speaks to the vision that Eat a Truth talked about, how to engage on the ground when the nomination process is happening, that potentially through public-private partnership could galvanize that opportunity and bring those folks together. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Joel. Jim, we're running out of time, so I'm going to turn to the kind of the big question that I hope we can get to as many of the panelists on as we have time for. We've heard a lot of different perspectives, from the global to the local to international to domestic here in the United States, and all the challenges in between. What gives you hope for actually kind of righting the ship, if you will, and getting us on a path forward that actually is a healthy and sustainable ocean and planet?
Okay, so I'm going to take one piece of that, and you guessed it, it's going to start with blue food. So if you recognize that the food from the sea is a nutrition powerhouse, it changes the way you think about the possibilities and the stakes, right? So it means that, for example, one of our researchers found that many coastal nations could solve their malnutrition problems by better use of the fish in their coastal waters. It means that you realize that if you empower women in coastal fisheries, you get better results for the nutrition in their families and in their communities. It means that if you invest in protected areas and other conservation measures, you're actually improving health and well-being for all the people in your coastal communities and often in your country. So recognizing the value of these resources is, to me, at the very heart of this. And let me just give you one quick example. I can do this in 30 seconds. The Pacific Island states, who Monica referenced a few minutes ago, they control most of the water between Australia and Hawaii, right? Because they are large ocean states. They have 200 miles of ocean around every single island in their territories. They have come together in the last year and a half to say, we are going to protect the ocean real estate that we own. We are committing to 30% protection across what they call the Blue Pacific continent. That is more than 1 billion hectares of protection. It's larger than the continent of Africa. And at the heart of that agenda is an investment in coastal food systems and the ecosystems that support them. So it is food. It's recognizing the vital importance of the oceans as a source of food, and conservation as what will enable them to take that into the future. And that gives me hope.
Great, thanks. And nice and tight. Monica, I'm going to ask you the same question. What gives you hope?
Thank you. And it's, I think, the power of technology and the power of every single person who's listening to this podcast. The technology is there for us to actually monitor and enforce these protected areas. They're only as good as our ability to keep them protected, and that means monitoring and enforcement. But we have unbelievable tools now that will allow us to do that. And that way we can trace fish all the way from the water, the boat, to the plate. And that means consumers, like all of you listening, can make a huge difference by looking for labeled seafood, sustainable seafood. Know what you're buying. You have the biggest power of all out there, and that will change, continue to change. It's already changing. People have that seafood guide. But if you buy sustainable fish, that demand signal will carry us a long, long way.
Great. Edie Truth, in 2 minutes, what gives you hope?
Thank you. So for me, what gives me hope is that conversation is happening. It all begins with communication. And this communication is two-sided. Like here, we are talking right now, right? At this level of the UN. But also back in our countries at the regional level, conversation has to happen in order for steps to happen, strides to be made. So this gives me hope because I'm hopeful with that conversation, with the openings that women are coming in, with the collective action. It means the voices, are being listened to. And even though action, responding to those voices could take a while, but already it's giving me hope that there shall come a day when we see these policies, these regulations, these whatever documents that are governing and they are guiding towards the prosperous future of our ocean is going to be implemented for the best interest of the marine resources and the people.
Excellent, thank you. Joel, 1 minute.
Okay, what gives me hope? I could go with the cliche and say the next generation, and I think that's a given. I think they inspire me every day. I think they also challenge us, and I think we need that. But I'm also going to say that these marine protected areas are living laboratories, and what gives me hope is that the things that we need in the future are being tested and evolved and explored right now in marine protected areas all around the world. Let's take those stories, let's lift them up, let's give them a global platform. I think that gives me hope.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you to the panelists. This has been a great conversation. I want to thank the Walton Family Foundation again and Foreign Policy Magazine. Thank you for the opportunity for the live podcast of The Catch. Again, if you haven't subscribed, please go to your phone and subscribe. Foreign Policy and the Walton Family Foundation will be coming out with new episodes in early 2025. And it is, again, tremendous content. And thank the producers. Thank Foreign Policy. My name is Matt Rand again. I'm the Senior Director of Ocean Habitat at Pew. And thank you all for listening. Thank you for coming today. We'll be around for a little while to take additional questions. Thank you.